Welcome to StarCast. This edition focuses on some of the changes our voluntary sector and supply base may expect as a result of the new Procurement Act. The Procurement Act became law in October 2023, and the implementation was delayed by 12 months to allow the public sector to prepare and implement the necessary changes. The go-live date is the 28th of October 2024. At STAR, we are busy preparing for the new legislation and receiving training from central government. The new legislation is seen as a great opportunity to reinvigorate public sector procurement after leaving the EU and introduces measures that work for the UK both nationally and at a local level. It also takes into account the World Trade Organization government procurement agreements in place, facilitating international trade. Designed to simplify procurement law, it combines 4 pieces of legislation, including utilities and service concessions, into a single document. From October, we should have the launch of the Central Digital Platform, which expands on the existing Find a Tender service website. All suppliers who intend to work with the public sector will need to register on the new platform. It is intended to reduce fraud and provide a way to track performance of suppliers, but also have all opportunities in one place and to make it easier to bid for new work. It will be linked to the common e-senders such as the CHEST. The current supplier questionnaire, or SQ, will be replicated to some extent on the platform, and this information will be pulled through the CHEST and other e-tendering systems, removing the need to complete the same qualifying information for every tender. You will just need to ensure the Central Digital Platform is kept up to date. By having unique identifiers for suppliers, central government are hoping to improve data on public spending, compliance with payment terms and supplier performance. The Act is very clear on its expectations for transparency. Often it has been confusing for the supply base to track contracts throughout its life cycle, especially if you are not directly involved in the tender process. There are now 17 different public notices, up from 4. These notices will be the main source of information to a supplier, not only those who are involved in the tender process, but also when looking to track a contract to gather market research or when looking for subcontracting opportunities. Notices will act as a guide for sharing information publicly. There will now be a mechanism to advertise for pre-market engagement when required. And tender notices remain largely unchanged in practice, although we are yet to know the final content. Award in high-value contracts will include the need to publish a copy of the contract. Again, high-value contracts will require appropriate performance measures to be built into the contract. Only when appropriate, but most circumstances, a minimum of 3 KPIs will need to be agreed, published, and then performance against those KPIs will need to be published also for the life of the contract. Adhering to 30-day payment terms will be tracked, and failure to meet them will need to be published, as will the payment of large sums of money above £30,000 should also be published. Finally, when a contract comes to an end, a termination notice will be published declaring its end of life and providing the market with a summary of the contract expenditure. Local spend and social value are still a priority under the new regime. Not only does the legislation make it explicit that the tendering authority must remove barriers to entry for SMEs, but also ensure that any tendering process is not unnecessarily burdensome for suppliers. The Procurement Act is set to allow councils to identify local areas to restrict participation in tendering for below-threshold tenders by relaxing some sections of the Local Government Act 1988. A move which should assist us in supporting our local markets. The Act is bolstered through its now formal links to the National Procurement Policy Statement, or NPPS, which demonstrates the importance of social value and the role it has to play both for the tendering organisation and the community it serves. Our local SMEs and voluntary sector are able to deliver some of the most meaningful and impactful social value in our local areas organically, and any opportunity to encourage services remaining local is an opportunity for social value. There will be three procedures available for tendering: the open and direct procedures, which remain largely unchanged from the old regime, but we do see the introduction of the competitive flexible procedure. This procedure allows for innovative tendering practices, allowing the buyer to establish multi-stage processes, meaning stages could be dedicated to dialogue, presentations, or negotiations, for example. Suppliers should be mindful of this when tendering under this procedure. It is likely that each process could differ, and it is important you understand the expectation and resource required to participate in each of the stages. These stages will be clearly outlined in the tender documents. With this being said, it is still a requirement that the Council does not design a tender process which is unnecessarily burdensome for suppliers, so there will be a fine balance to achieve. The competitive flexible procedure is not entirely a new concept. It is born from the success of a very similar procedure used under the light touch regime in health and social care sectors, which has brought councils closer to their markets and understanding of pressures and priorities on both sides of the table, resulting in some innovative contract solutions. The hope is that enabling tendering in this way will invigorate the market and encourage innovation and achieve the best results for the council, using negotiation skills and dialogue to ensure best value. The changes to frameworks and dynamic markets look to move away from locking suppliers and new entrants out of appropriate markets. Open frameworks can be opened up to new entrants throughout its term at specified points in time. Lots with multiple suppliers will require mini-competition to award work when the need arises to call off. Dynamic markets welcome new entrants who are able to demonstrate they meet the required criteria at any point. Again, these will require those approved to participate in a call-off exercise to determine the most advantageous tender per activity. If you hear reference to these, know that this may not be a missed opportunity, and you should be able to find out how and when you can participate by contacting the procurement team. The Act seeks to standardise the information that suppliers are provided following an unsuccessful tendering opportunity. These will be provided in the form of assessment summaries and should be expected following every above threshold tender. Assessment summaries should contain a breakdown of how the bid performed against each of the award criterion with an explanation of the scores given. Using this information constructively can help improve bid writing in future. By using the same style, it will enable suppliers to become accustomed to the information in an easy-to-interpret format. Further, in contracts with a value above £5 million, a redacted copy of the final contract will be published, as will the successful tenderer's performance against the listed KPIs, so other suppliers can track how the contract will work and how well they perform. Commercial information will of course be redacted, and you can identify in your bid submission information which you consider to be commercially sensitive so that it is not published. As well as improving transparency, there is a move to improve accountability both for the buying organisation and the supply base. The Procurement Review Unit will provide checks and balances on organisations to make sure they adhere to the legislation. The PRU will be split into two sections. One, looking at the buying organisation and how they are carrying out procurement activity, which is mindful of the aims of the new rules. The second section will be responsible for the debarment of suppliers who engage in excludable activities, such as fraud or threats to national security. They will issue sanctions prohibiting these organisations from competing for public sector opportunities for a set period of time, or until the organisation can provide evidence that they have rectified the issue, known as self-cleaning. Through the performance data published on large contracts or publication of a termination notice where poor performance was at play, This will now be public information and may be considered as part of a future tender exercise with not only the aggrieved buying organisation but other organisations who are now party to the information. This additional accountability is there to protect the public purse and ensure it is being spent responsibly and promises made at tender stage are delivered upon during the life of the contract. As well as attending some of the free events that are tabled, listen out for communications from both the Cabinet Office and your regular public authority customers. We will be continuing to share information with our suppliers and looking to support them through the transition to the new legislation. Take some time to watch the knowledge drops provided on the government website. KD3 is a generic overview for all suppliers, with KD3B providing some extra information and support for SMEs and the voluntary sector. And finally, mark your diary for the 28th of October. This is when the changeover happens, and you will need to register your company on the new central digital platform. We assume that you will not be able to register before this date, but it's important to register on or soon after so you don't miss any opportunities that will be advertised here going forward. Once registered, you are given a unique identifier code that you will be able to enter onto the chest when tendering with any of the Star Councils. The chest will continue to be our e-tendering platform, but you will need to have also registered on the central digital platform as this is now mandated by law. Thank you for listening to this edition of Starcast. If you have any questions, please do get in touch with us on procurement@star-procurement.gov.uk.